the co-chair, and the reason for starting this caucus is that it takes us too long to build things in this country. And we act like it's the first time every time. So if we have a bridge that needs to be rebuilt, you know, we go through all the studies and the time-consuming process is the same as if we'd never built a bridge before. And what would make a lot more sense is to take everything we know from bridges we've built in the past and start there. And then figure out what's specific to this bridge that we need to study. And that is an idea that has support, very strong support on both sides of the aisle, because you know it takes a long time to build a solar farm, it takes a long time to rebuild a bridge, it takes a long time to put in a new highway. Every state has things they need to get done, and it's not just that the process is expensive and time consuming, which it is, but projects get more expensive the longer you wait to build them. And so it's hard for state and local governments to budget for things when the process makes them more and more expensive. And now I can't remember what question I was starting to answer.
Well, I think there's another couple of provisions in there.
Yeah.
But something that you brought up that I kind of want to maybe highlight a little bit is the federal land use issues, because that became a big, a big to-do, and I think there was a lot of misconceptions about what was actually happening there. Would love for your...
Yeah, I'll tell that story. So I actually had a conversation about that this morning with somebody. Again, that was 6 months ago, but it's still one of the questions I answer the most. When the Natural Resources Committee, which I'm on, was working on our title of the One Big Beautiful Bill, I offered an amendment that would dispose of specific parcels of land, sell them at fair market value to local governments. And the reason that worked in the One Big Beautiful Bill is that it's a reconciliation bill, and reconciliation is a revenue bill. And so if you sell them at fair market value, that's a revenue generator, and it fits in there. The biggest thing that people ask me about is like, it was a midnight amendment, you offered it at midnight. It was actually 11 p.m. But part of the reason is because it was a 17-hour hearing. If I could have offered it at noon, I would have gladly done that. But we had maps, and it took a little while for people to find the maps. So most of them were here in Washington County, and they were parcels that were for infrastructure, for our water reuse plans here, for some roads, for some trails, for the airport, and they were just little pieces here and there that added up to a few thousand acres, and then 3 in Beaver County. But what happened is, because we did it quickly, and I learned a lesson from that. In the absence of good information, rumors abound, and a lot of people got really upset, especially kind of the hook and bullet crowd were worried that we were selling like fishing and hunting lands. And once that genie was out of the bottle, we never could quite get it back in. So even this morning, I was talking to somebody in Cedar City who was like, why were you trying to sell off the top of Cedar Mountain? There was nothing even in Iron County in the bill. But the Wilderness Society put out some maps, basically of like all public land, and they were like, this is what's on the chopping block. And you never could get the narrative back after that. So it got stripped out of the House bill. And it was only a thing for about a day. But here we are 6 months later still talking about it. But I am committed to trying to help towns and cities in Utah get the infrastructure that we need. We are surrounded by federal land. And I am a federal representative. It's my job to represent the people in this part of Utah at the federal level and make sure we have what we need. And so I haven't given up on making sure we can build the infrastructure we need, but it was never a plan to sell off any like pristine fishing rivers or hunting land. But it is a good example of one of those things where once the narrative takes off, it's really hard to reel it back in. And that's just always going to be something that we have to work on in politics. The way we do things matters. The way we talk about things matters. And it's always healthy to look at things with a grain of salt, no matter which side of it you're on, and think, like, is this really what's happening, or should I get a little bit more information?
It's helpful. I think you're touching on all of that touched on the bigger issue of multiple use. you took your seat in Congress in a special election, so you actually came in during the Biden administration. And one of the initial things you worked on there was, I'm going to get this right, the Conservation and Landscape Health Rule, dealing with multiple use. And I just want to ask you, how do you feel as the importance of multiple use? Is it being communicated well? What does that entail for anybody, regular citizen, people that all of us out there saying, okay, what is the deal with federal lands and how can we best, work with them?
Yeah, the Conservation Landscape Health Rule is a good example of what happens when Congress isn't assertive enough at doing our job. So the FLPMA, the last big comprehensive public lands, mandate that Congress gave to the agencies, said to manage BLM land for multiple use and sustained yield. And multiple use means, the most uses that are compatible on the land at the same time. And then sustained yield obviously means using resources at a rate that they can replace themselves. And that's been the law since 1976. But during the Biden administration, there was a proposal from the administration to make conservation a permitted use. And when you make that a permitted use, it pushes the other permitted uses off, which is not multiple use. But we're so far removed from FLPMA in 1976 that it's the same problem I was talking about with appropriations bills. If you're not going back and renewing those orders on a fairly regular basis, it's easy to start to deviate off into something else and feel like, we just have the ability to make rules. But those rules have to be compliant with the congressional mandate. And so when that came out, a lot of people here were really upset. I was getting a lot of calls. And we introduced the West Act, which would be a congressional reminder of multiple use is still the law of the land. They didn't get the rule implemented by the end of the administration. Now we have a new administration. That administration is not going to implement the rule. But that alone is a good example of, I happen to be on the side that's glad that the new administration didn't implement the rule. But this back and forth happens between administrations, and it's not really good for anybody. We should be able to have some certainty of, once a rule is implemented, of how it's going to be implemented for, at least more than 4 years. And that's where Congress has to do a better job of codifying these rules and holding the agencies accountable and making sure they're not doing anything that violates their congressional mandate, because then you get that back and forth effect that isn't good for anybody. It wastes a lot of taxpayer dollars, creates uncertainty for families and businesses and everybody who wants to be out on the land or any other category. And we've gotten so used to rules coming out of agencies that we kind of got out of the habit of questioning them. And that's a habit I want us to get back in. That's another one of those muscle memory things I want us to relearn. Because if I do something you don't like, I'm going to come here. I'm going to come sit here and talk to people, and I'm going to hear from you. But if the Secretary of Agriculture or the Secretary of Interior does something you don't like, what do? You can do a change.org petition. I've never seen one of those change of policy. You can write letters. It just the idea that the government should respond to the people and be accountable to the people gets undermined when rules are made by agencies and they're not in line with what Congress has told those agencies to do.
Well, and that's something that we've seen probably across a lot of issue sets.
Yeah.
Is how do we bring back the authority to people in Congress and Congress's rightful oversight role in constitutionally limited government. So appreciate your work there. Wanted to highlight a big change, obviously, that we've talked about a little bit, but earlier this month, with the tragic passing of Congressman Doug LaMalfa from California, who was the former chair, House chair of the Western Caucus, you were elected the new chair, so congratulations. And I think, obviously, I think they couldn't ask for a better future of leadership there. We have worked hand in glove with the Western Caucus because it's one of the few congressional caucuses, in my opinion, that every event we go to, we're bringing in people from all over the spectrum, talking about issues that are impacting people daily. So I just want to give you a chance to kind of cast your vision on where you see the Western Caucus going. What does the Western Caucus do? How can it be more effective?
Thank you. I'm really excited about this opportunity. Obviously not the way it came about. Doug LaMalfa was a good friend of mine. He asked me to be his vice chair, and I assumed that, you know, maybe 3 or 5 years from now I would take a run at being the chair, and this was not something I had in my plan for this year. But I have been a big fan of Western Caucus for a lot longer than I've been a member of it. When I was working here doing public lands policy, I would attend a lot of their events. When I was a staffer, I attended a lot of their events. And the thing I like about Western Caucus is that they stay focused on the issues that matter to people in this area. So the membership, there's a member from, I think, every state in the country. There's 110 members. It's bigger than the Senate. Obviously, not all of them are from the West. But the reason people join Western Caucus is because it's focused on rural issues and resources issues. And those are things that I care a lot about and that matter a lot in this district. There are, I don't know, probably thousands of caucuses in Congress, and most of them are like clubs, kind of, and the House doesn't really formally recognize them in any way. There are only, I think, about half a dozen executive caucuses that the House recognizes that have staff, that have a role in shaping policy, and Western Caucus is one of those. So it's a big responsibility, but it's one that I've kind of been preparing for a lot longer than I knew I needed to be preparing for it. And my vision for it is I would like Western Caucus to be really focused on policy. We have a mantra on our team. I always remind my staff, like, calm and nerdy. That's our brand. We're calm, we're nerdy, we give people good information, we don't blow out the handle. And I want to see a lot of that in Western Caucus, where we become a resource for members of Congress, but also for outside groups who have interest in these issues, where we can give people good information that helps them make good decisions. We can help people understand why something like the conservation landscape rule is a problem. We can help them understand why you know, some NEPA reforms are necessary to be able to keep up with the infrastructure needs in this country. That instead of just talking points, we're giving people good data, good, well-reasoned arguments to help them make the decisions that are going to keep us moving forward and prospering, to keep our rural areas and our small town main streets healthy, and make sure that we're using our natural resources in a way that makes sense and is sustainable long term. And so that's my vision for the caucus. It's very large. It's going to take a lot of, you know, time to get everybody sort of pulling in the same direction, but I'm confident that we can and will get there. And Doug left it in really good shape. So.
Yeah, well, you do have big shoes to fill. Literally, he was a giant man. But
sorry, can I point of privilege here for a second? So I was in California this weekend for Doug LaMalfa's funeral, and I just want to say this to everybody here. If you've ever seen Congress's approval ratings, they're like right around just lower than cockroaches as a body. But there are a few members in Congress that just, there's something special about them. And Doug was one of those guys. He's a farmer from Northern California, 65-year-old guy, didn't cut his hair very often. And he's like, I don't know, 6 foot.
He's
something very
tall.
Kind of shaggy. And he and I first bonded because we had the same outdated iPhone that still had like the button on it. And both of us had cracked screens and neither one of us could get through the whole day without a charge. So I would carry around like a charging bar, and I would charge mine and then his. But he died really unexpectedly the day we were all coming back from Christmas. So everyone had been home with their families. It's kind of tough to come back anyway. And then we lost one of our colleagues. Watching the way people reacted to his passing has been a really good lesson for me. So he's a Republican from California, so most of his colleagues in his delegation are Democrats, and the tributes they made to him were so touching. And most of the people, I got to sit through several tributes to Doug, I got to speak at several tributes to Doug. Almost no one talked about any of his legislation, and he had a lot of it. He was a very effective legislator. What everybody talked about was how Doug made people feel and the way he treated other people. And California is not a state where their politics are calm. It's not a state where they're super friendly to each other and handle each other with kid gloves. And even on the Natural Resources Committee, Doug was on the committee with me, the ranking members from California, the ranking member, you know, he's not gentle with us in hearings, but the things he said about his colleague who he served with were very loving and gentle and friendly, and I just, you know, if we all live good lives, that's what we all hope people remember us for when we're gone. Not which policies we passed, but how we treated people, how we made people feel. And that's all. That was just gratuitous. I just wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that. And I couldn't agree more. Having watched him for many years, and having family in his district, you know, especially he knew, you know, I think it's really important to have people that have worked the land that they represent, and he did that. So, one thing that you brought, you talked about Congressman Maloy, you said he's an effective legislator, and I think about Congress now, and Congress's approval rating is dismal. It has been traditionally because it's easy to point to a whole body and say, you know, you are ineffective. But I can't help but think that some of that is because we are, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse in the age of social media, in the age of always on cameras, this and that. It's hard to find effective legislators, and I know that you have banked your brand on being one, and I think that, and I having been around many, many legislators over the years, the effect that you've had, just the ability to work the legislative landscape has been phenomenal. But I think, you know, that's credit to you having had a lot of experience on the legislative side, even coming into this job. But big picture, what do you see as the key to getting Congress back to being a more effective legislative body? Like, what are we, you know, AFP is big on in the reform space. Those of you that are familiar with AFP, we are very focused on process reform. The stuff